A very good morning to one and all present here. So we will be starting our panel discussion for today, and the topic for which is publishing in high quality journals. Proudly, we would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. The first panelist is our moderator of the panel, and he is Professor Jeet Gupta. Sir is the Professor of Information Systems Department at University of Alabama in Huntsville. Our second panelist is Professor Kingshuk Sinha. He is the Chair and Professor of Supply Chain and Operations Department, Mosaic Company, Jim Prokapanko. Our third panelist is Professor Dilip Chhajed. He is the Professor of Business Admin at Illinois Geese College of Business. Our fourth panelist is Professor Prashant Palvia. He is the Professor, Department of Information System and Supply Chain at Bryan School of Business and Economics. Our fifth panelist is Professor Roman Kapuscinski. He is the Professor of Technology and Operations at University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. I would like to ask Professor Jeet Gupta to start the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to first take the opportunity to thank the SP Jain Institute of Management and Research for hosting the ISDSI conference and the wonderful job that both Sajeev and Shriram has done in putting it together. And second thing I want to do is to welcome all of you here and appreciate your giving us a chance to share our thoughts with you. Hopefully they will be useful to you in some way. We also want to learn from you in this exchange as much as possible. So the way we will do this is that we will have some initial remarks from each of the panelists for about 6 to 7 minutes each. And after that, we will open up for discussion because most of the things that we want to talk about actually are going to come from the discussion rather than just the prepared talks. Prepared talks is just to set the stage that we can have. Also, I just want to go through a basic assumption that we will make in this. And that assumption is that you have already done the research and you have completed the research. And now you are in the process of thinking about writing a paper, submitting a paper for publication, or in that process to find out what should you do to write a paper, what should you do to navigate the process of publication, how do you choose a journal if you have to. Very little we'll talk about that, but then how do you really get to publish in the high quality journals? I'm very fortunate to have these panelists with me. This panel represents, at my last count, at least 120 years of experience of researching, editorial work, publishing, all of that in the high quality journals. So this is a very distinguished panel. Each one of them holds an endowed chair. And the endowed chair is one that comes with all the things in the distinguished research career that the people have. So with that introduction, I just want to take the opportunity to set the stage before I pass on to everybody else. Let me just do this. Okay. So I will just set the stage in the beginning as to what we will do today, and then go through and then pass on to the panelists. Now, as I said, you have done the research and you deserve the recognition for your work, and publication is a recognition of your work, okay? And in order to get the recognition, you will be writing, you will be publishing and all that. And what happens is often the research and publications, even if they are published, don't get noticed. I mean, they lie there. People say, you know, yeah, I look at the citation, and there are no citations of this work. Nobody seems to be paying attention. In fact, in the doctoral consortium, there was a talk saying that the article is published in the top level journal, but there are only 4 citations of the work. So that happens, so that is there too. And therefore, we want to explore the means for which you can maximize the value that you can get out of your research work by way of publishing and all of that. And we will provide some tips from our experience in some form or the other, mostly through the questions and answers and that kind of things. So I think when I was in the doctoral consortium 2 days ago, Shriram used a slide that from Ram Narasimha. Ram Narasimha used to be a partner in my game here before, until he retired. And Shri Ram called that slide that the three things as IRR, interest, relevance, and rigor. Here I have the three I's, and this is also taking from Ram and my liberty with Ram's I's that he has. The first is the same as Shri Ram has interest. Will people be interested in your research and publications? I mean, it can also be considered as importance. Now, the thing that I want to emphasize here is that once we do the research, each one of us who does the research knows more about that research than anybody else in the world. At least that's the way it should be. So this is not a question of whether you know the research or not, whether you have done it and everything like that. This is a question, why should somebody else be interested in it? That's what we need to take a look at from the point of view of the reviewers, from the point of view of the editors, from the point of view of the readers. Why should they be interested in it? And unless you can get to that aspect of their interest, it is very difficult for you to make an impact through your publication. The second is the impact itself. What impact will your research and publication have, both in the short term as well as in the long term? And that also you need to be thinking about it, because I think it is good for you to find out the impact that you want to have. Okay? Because if you don't decide that, you will not be able to select even the journal that you want to, and you will not be able to write in the format that you want to write to, and all of that. Okay? And the third is the insights. I think it is very important nowadays, particularly, that it is not the model itself, it is not the technique that you use to solve the problem, or the algorithm that you develop, or the computational results that you do, or the empirical studies that you do, or the experiments you perform. It is, what do you get out of that, and what can the reader get out of it? Can the reader relate to it and say, oh, gee, I got something out of it. This is a great insight. This is a great message that I got. So if you think about it, these are the three I's that if you pay attention to them in the writing, that goes a long way. Then the other thing is the writing analogy. I think all of us, when we were growing up, we were always mesmerized by the street charmers. And the street charmers are very good in telling the story, just like the Disney people are in the world. They are very good in telling the stories. Writing a paper is telling a story like that, because you want to be able to mesmerize the reader so the reader doesn't give up reading the paper. And that is really telling a story. That is what is in your mind. You want to be able to do that. Unless you hold the interest of the person all through the paper that you have, you're not going to get your message across, and therefore you will not have the impact of the publication that you want to have. And I think one of the things I want you to remember is this. Street charmers are there. Disney people are there. So when they are telling this story, they can gauge and find out if the people are interested in it, people are making sense, and you are making sense. But in your case, when you write a paper, when it is published, you won't be there. Even with the reviewers, you won't be there to tell the reviewer, oh, I'm sorry, this is what I meant. I mean, I'm sorry, you didn't understand. Or let me explain. You won't be there. Or whatever you write has to communicate what you mean by it. And it has to communicate what impact you want to have with it. So those are some of the things that I would say in the beginning before I pass on. So the first speaker is Professor K.K. Sinha, and he's going to talk about writing the paper.
Thank you, Jeet. Good morning. So far as I'm concerned, I guess I'll follow Jeet's sort of guidance in the sense that I'll make some assumptions about the fact that you have some interest and the paper that you are either writing or plan on writing really reflects your interest, right? It's something you are enthused and excited about, and I think those of you who attended my keynote address yesterday, I think all I was trying to communicate is through the ideas of grand challenges is that these grand challenges catches the imagination of people. There is more than any one of us who get enthused and excited by these grand challenges, and different universities are conceptualizing and operationalizing in different ways. But interest is important because at the end of the day, to be able to sustain your research program, having a North Star, some sort of a motivation is very critical. And then if you believe in the question and the problems and the challenges, then I think other things can be done. And so with that as a backdrop, what I'm going to do is just share with you what I typically do in my PhD seminars. It's, how do you read papers, and then how do you write papers? And I'm not being very crass here. What I mean is that before we can contribute to the literature, we also have to be a consumer of the literature, right? Just like everything else, before you teach, you need to know a whole lot more than just going chapter by chapter. And so from that standpoint, I think having problems or a class of problems is important, that you believe in is worth working on. And that's really should come out in any paper. And it does. I mean, if you are sincere about it, it may take some time, but it does come out. I think the challenge that I sometimes feel, both, beginning with my own self, is a paper is one way that helps to truly get your colors out. In other words, and then sometimes a stream of papers does give you an identity at the end of the day. So a paper is one step at a time in terms of how you build that identity. The motivation, as you might expect, is this: we all need to. Why are we doing what we are doing? Why should somebody care? And then, given that we are a professional discipline, it's not just our peers, but also, we earn our keeps because of the profession. So that's what keeps people awake at night. And the good news is, being an academic, you have the freedom and flexibility a lot of counterparts in industry don't. And so the onus is on us to be able to get down to the bottom of things, provide insights. But what glues, or binds us together is the problem. There should never be any ambiguity about what the problem is. And it's true for any professional discipline. It doesn't matter whether you're a physician or an engineer or whatever, or a public policy guy. So I think that's basically one way to think about it. I think there is something to say about literature review, and that is, again, we need to consume the literature, and the literature is fast evolving, right? So we all have to keep up. There is no hegemony to say, hey, and in academia, the good news is nobody has any hegemony. If you are a chair professor, it's no different like being, say, a well-known movie star. Your one movie can be a blockbuster. That doesn't entitle the next movie is going to be successful. It can be a flop. And so every paper is an effort to prove yourself. And the person who can reject you could be an assistant professor, even a good doctoral student who the editor chooses to review the paper. You could be sitting here on the high horse thinking that you're the chair of the department or professor. It does not give you an indictment that your paper is going to get published. And that is the beauty of our profession in some sense, and keeps us all very grounded. So the literature review really does the following things. I mean, you need to know the lay of the land. You need to be able to position the work. You need to identify the holes. And how do you make a contribution? Either you're plugging some hole, or you're advancing the boundaries, or you're fixing some anomalies. There are some competing points of view. Hopefully, you go out and test the waters and provide some kind of insight. So those are not that difficult. That's exactly all we do. And a good literature review allows you to do all of that. Theory is important because this is not a consulting gig that we have to work. There are a lot of people who have done a lot of work, so that's the whole idea of deductive versus inductive. Either you develop theories or you test theories. But the end of the day is that there is something you would hope can be more generalizable, can withstand the test of time, and that's why you need the theory. Without theory, everything is becoming very crass and pedestrian. I think that's the whole idea. Research design and methods are clearly needed, And it's basically, in our profession, and the good news is, in fact, yesterday I said, we have an expanding quiver of methods that we are using. So a lot of these problems that we are working on don't necessarily fit into good methodological boundaries. In fact, it sometimes is limiting, and then that the saying goes, if you have a hammer, you're looking for a nail. On the other side, what I laid out yesterday is, yes, typically we were trained in operations research. Now we are also doing lots of econometrics, we are doing a lot of statistics, psychometrics. We are also doing a lot of grounded theory methods, which is case study qualitative analysis, and machine learnings are coming along. So do we done supervised and supervised learning and predict? All that is now part of the quiver. So the question is, depending on the different strokes for different folks, so given the kinds of problems you're encountering, what problem, so rather than be driven by the method, you're driven by the problem and bring to bear whatever methods inform that theory to address the problem and the data that you might have. And then at the end of the day, I think, just to highlight that at the end of the day, after most rigorous analysis, we all have to write it out, sort of, in a way that is consumable, right? And we owe it. We have to be the salesperson for our own results and make sure that all this is done in a way that musters some amount of robustness. This is not a fluke result that you try out and you do sometimes what we call the post-hoc analysis and the robustness thing. All of this to make sure we are doing good science. And then the conclusion is basically, as I said, so what, who cares? And every good paper acknowledges the limitations of the paper. In fact, that's one of the best things. You don't have if you don't lay out that kind of, especially when you're seeing as an editor, you want to define the boundary conditions of what your paper can do or it cannot do, because that sets the stage for what else needs to happen, which either you are doing or somebody else should be doing. And then, so those are like the nuts and bolts, I would say, of the paper. And obviously, it's a good starting point. By no means am I suggesting you should feel this as limited. The thing, though, I do want to highlight, because writing a paper is tiring, right? It can be also a drudgery. It can also take toll on us. So that at the end of the day, it's almost saying, thank God the paper is over, now I've written my third degree. I think titles do matter, because it's like, it's kind of the access to your paper. And so yes, if you need some time, take the time, but I would never trivialize on the title of the paper, because there is something called the truth in advertising. We couldn't do advertising, acknowledge that, and it's true as much for our papers. Abstracts are important. Sometimes that's what the editors of the see. And it's an elevator pitch, you call it what you may, it's a trailer, you can call it a sneak preview. It's no different than watching movies, right? You watch the sneak preview and you decide, should I go or should I not go? It serves as a gatekeeping function. I think, my advice is to say about writing papers that you first write to yourself, then you write to your co-author, and then together you write to the editor and the board, and then along the way, the readers come. So the reader has to be, we can be all excited, but we need to write it for others. And last but not the least, the target outlet. At the end of the day, it's like you launch a product in the wrong market at the wrong time, stuff is going to flop. There's nothing wrong with the paper. It's just where you target it. And the reason why I mentioned this is because once you're done writing with the paper, it's already 2.5 years, 3 years. You can't wait to get it out of your view. And so sometimes these are simple things that we gloss over, and then we get into this cycle, let's get just rejected or stuff happens. So those are my my comments. What I would like to also, you have it. Prashant. Oh, Prashant, okay. The one thing is very important, I feel, to also, as you hear this, to understand from your standpoint, what is that is holding, or what do you want to be addressed? So, thank you.
Good morning again. I think we are holding questions until the end. Let's do that. Otherwise, we'll never finish. Can you hear me well? I have a prepared presentation. Can you move? That's right. So, but before I did do that, some of it is going to be repetitive by its very nature because some of the topics. But as I was listening, I jotted down a few points, and I will mention on them. So I'm going to give you some specific tips, and then I'll rapidly go through my presentation, or I might skip it. I wrote down a few points. I think the whole idea is, and I think my brother Shalandra Palvia is here. He said it this morning. I told him that I'm going to be in this panel, and he said something that stuck to my mind. He said this, that the whole idea is about writing high quality articles. The focus, and I think as what you want to do, you have to write high quality articles. If you write high quality articles, then they will get published in good journals. So that's the point. So the focus should be on writing high quality articles. That's tip one. Number two was, don't be afraid of rejections. Everyone gets rejections. Even though we are all endowed chairs sitting here, I'm pretty sure, unless you are a Superman, are you? I don't think you are. Every one of us gets rejections. And I think you want to raise hands? So everyone gets rejections. So don't be afraid of that. Part of the game is perseverance. You have to keep at it. And my dean said this, and I followed his advice. And I've done this, I was doing this anyway. He said this rule for good researchers, highly prolific researchers. He said a rule of 3-3-3. This is how it works. At any given year, you should be writing 3 new papers. If you do that, 3 new good papers. And then if you do that, then you'll have 3 papers in review at any given year. And 3 papers that are published every year. So the rule of 3 writing new papers, 3 in review, and 3 published. And if you keep constantly doing that, maybe you cannot do, depending on your teaching load, you can still do 2-2-2. That's the point. So that's one. Then I call it the 3 Qs, and I cheat a little bit when I say 3 Qs. Quality, quantity, and my cheating is continuity. It doesn't exactly start with a Q, but that's fine, but it makes a good line there. Your focus should be on quality, of course, but it should also be somewhat of a quantity. And what I'm suggesting by that is a portfolio approach. You cannot write every single article in a top-tier journal. You know that. Even if you do that, it won't get published. So you should have a wide range of, I would stay away from, personally, there are some journals which are predatory journals, or they'll publish anything, and sometimes they'll write to you, submit your paper. Even if you publish that, you don't get much credit. But still, you should have a range of those. Okay. The other point I was going to make, I think I can go with this. So going to my slides. Okay. I'm going to point to 2 types of journals. There are the regular journals, like your top tier journals. I represent the IS area, and most of my colleagues here in other areas. There are regular journals and there are niche journals. So you should also look at publishing niche journals as well as, so this is a niche journal, and we can talk about it more. And there is information management, which is in the broader spectrum of those. Okay, so I passed that, okay. This is the typical structure of a high quality paper. And now there can be some variations, and some of these were mentioned by KK here. Look at that, and these, I'm giving you some approximate page lengths up there. Okay, let's spend some time. All right, these are some nuggets of advice which have been given. Address an important research question. That has been something that has been done over and over. Without mentioning the topic area, there's one topic area, and some of my people, some of the audience members will recognize in IS research, which I thought there were thousands of papers written on that, but someone in the audience mentioned there were 9 lakh papers written on that particular, using that particular model of that. Now what I do is, since I'm an editor of a journal, if I get those papers related, I do a desk reject. Because the results are typically the same. So when there are thousands and thousands of papers, you don't want to address that. because by definition, starting out, your contribution is going to be very minimal. So that's one. Sound theoretical foundations, yes, but at the same point, not every paper has to be totally theory-based. There are papers, especially where you may be a descriptive paper, which still has important findings. So that's certainly acceptable. So yes, I do believe there should be strong theory, but not every single paper has to be, and I can give you several examples. Strong analysis, good writing, good paper, and that sort of thing. Do not make your research model too complex. One of the temptations that I've seen by newer researchers is they will throw in everything, the whole thing, whole enchilada, and they may have like 20 things, all kinds of connections, get so complex. My rule of thumb is 5 to 7 constructs and fewer relationships. Get the paper vetted by colleagues. The other thing I was going to say was, let's see, am I on time? Okay. Oh, before I go to this slide, what I found out lately, and I think it's true, by selling the paper, by the time you write your introduction, the editor, and the paper goes to the editor and then the reviewers, they should be sold on the paper. So one thing I'm finding more and more, it seems to make sense, although when I first saw it, I wasn't very happy about it, was, the contribution part, typically earlier, that used to be put towards the end. What many top-tier journals are doing now is they will provide some synopsis of even the results in the introduction itself. And at first, I wasn't too excited about that idea, because if you're going to do that later, why are you repeating that? But I think the reason they're doing that, and the introduction tends to be long, they provide some, some inkling of the results and the contributions. So by the time your introduction, your research question should be clearly spelled out, and your contributions are known, so the people say, this is something I want to do. Writing is important. And I know most people, just about everybody is here from India. We all take pride in our writing skills. I mean, we learned from the Britishers, and we write English, and I did too, and everybody else. We think our English is too. But academic writing is different. And I know Indians, and myself included, I've changed over the years. We love to write long sentences. We to run into like 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. The longer we line, we think it's better. No. Typically, no sentence should be more than 10, 12, 14 words. The simpler writing is better. These are some of the things. Put your ego aside. The other thing is plagiarism is fatal to your career. And I've seen papers where papers come in, they're even literature review, and there, at least I know of one case which was reported in the communications of the ACM, where somebody essentially stole the entire dissertation from somebody else's work. And that person is no longer in the academia. So even if you do little plagiarism, it's not good. And now there are software tools which can check it very quickly. So stay away from it. Even if you have to borrow material, you can always rephrase this, paraphrases, that's the word I want to use, and give references. I'll stop there. I think I might have run over my time.
So this mic?
Yes.
111. Okay, so my biggest difficulty will be number of hands. Typically, I like to use both hands to show things, and now I have to keep microphone in one hand and clicker in another one. So let me try to. Am I going in the right direction?
No, you're not.
Okay, so this is me. So basically, I thought about what papers are published, and basically, it's easy to think about white papers being good papers, black papers being bad papers. The truth is, most papers are gray papers. It's not like you immediately see a paper and basically say, this is a great job, this is a really terrible job. So really there is still a correlation. Good papers tend to be published, and some of the worst ones are published. The question is how to publish your paper. So I like to think about Picasso. Basically, one way to think about this is that if you have a beautiful result, it will get published. Well, it's not necessarily true. You paint a Picasso, and maybe the audience will be impressed, maybe it will not be impressed. Your challenge is to basically make sure that this is going to happen. So the question is, what artwork is published? So they don't have to be Picassos, but they have to have, of course, sufficient value added. But the second one that I will try to a little bit emphasize, they need to be explained really, really well. And that's actually where many papers are actually weaker at. So when we think about sufficient value added, well, you have here 2 dimensions. Of course, we have many more dimensions, and you have a bunch of papers that over last few decades were published, and the question is, where is your paper? If it's very similar to overwhelming number of papers, of course, it's difficult to make a case. If it's somewhere between the papers, it's possible to make the case, but of course, the issue is, can one push a little bit this boundary? And actually, from point of view of explanation of the paper, it's much easier if you can compare the paper to existing one and basically tell, this is the difference between what is already done versus what your paper is doing. And it doesn't have to be a huge difference. It has to be a very clear difference in a very specific dimension. That doesn't have to be gigantic one. Explanation. I think it's underestimated that papers need to explain it really well. When we think about reviewing process after submission, reviewing process is a process. DE, departmental editor, has to evaluate a bunch of papers. Huge number of papers are coming and tries to match the paper with the best associate editor. Associate editor often tries to figure out who would be the best referees, and basically doesn't necessarily mean that it understands every detail. And the paper should not go to wrong DE, should not go to wrong AE, should not go to wrong referees. The question is how to make that happen. Well, these people are busy. They are writing their own papers, teaching, having got other administrative jobs. Your task is basically to make it easy for those people to understand what you are doing and where precisely you are adding value. So if you say your contribution is here in those 2 dimensions, it's very difficult to judge. If you say, well, there are these papers, there are another group of papers, and maybe a 3rd group of papers, and this is the best that is done, then it basically, editor very easily starts to understand, well, this is probably who I should send the paper to. This is basically what will be the most relevant comparison, and your explanation can help in that direction. Now, you need to help referees to appreciate the work. Typically, referees want to do a very fair, good job in terms of evaluating the papers. But craftsmanship matters. It means language matters. It has to be not only clear, but typical words, vocabulary that are used in for given type of topics. If it's a standard term in inventory theory, holding cost, and somebody doesn't use that cost, and basically after a few pages, you basically say, wow, that must be really the term that the authors refer to. It just basically starts to eat into frustration of the reader. Knowledge of literature and clearly describing the contribution matters. Now, knowledge of literature is tricky, but if you put yourself in shoes of referee says, well, this is a paper that basically looks at blockchaining, but blockchaining, this is value of information. And value of information is a critical element to know ABC. I wrote that 20 years ago. So, I mean, typical referee, of course, is biased in terms of their own work, but one needs to explain it in terms of existing pieces and how it compares. It's probably risky to say that the paper has one contribution. But it's also risky to say that paper has 20 contributions. And the question is there a way to structure it? This is the main one. These are the supporting ones. And different referees may actually appreciate different contributions in a different way, but it actually gives some kind of picture of how you view it, and they may view it in a different way. So converging on one central topic rather than many is always helpful. Not overstating things, because when you start reading a paper as a AE referee and you say this is exaggerated, it's very difficult to get of the mindset of that the claims are inflated, and at that moment of time, even reading the paper, it's possible to miss the fact that there are some really wonderful nuggets that should be appreciated in the paper. Now, I like to use the term that a really good paper has to prove things beyond reasonable skepticism. It cannot be unreasonable skepticism, but if reader is reasonably skeptical, is it really important? Is it really the driver? Does it really matter? Well, it is the author's name, basically responsibility to confirm that, yes, I thought about that. Yes, this modeling assumption makes sense. Yes, this modeling assumption is gigantic simplification, but I don't have alternatives. Here is why I have chosen that, and basically alternatives would lead to something that is not doable, not analyzable. So basically, and authors need to know nuances of the area that they describe to. If it's paper about selling wines, probably it's good to know about winemaking and a little bit around to basically, because it will go to people who know this area very well. So what DE, AE, and referees look for? Yes, they look for new ideas, impact, and insight, but as long as there is sufficient value added, the paper has good chances to be published. It has to be understandable, clear, and I really like to emphasize the last two bullets. It has to be executed well. It has to be complete positioning, appropriate level of detail, depth, and craftsmanship. It's nearly overkill to convince, it's necessary to do an overkill to convince reasonably skeptical audience that this is value added.
I'm going to talk about some nuts and bolts about how to revise the paper. So if I can have a show of hands, how many of you are right now in the process of revising papers? Good. So maybe this might help, or you can tell me what you are doing. This is a slide from Jeet, just outlining the basic process of the review. And I'm focusing on that you have written the paper, you have sent it, sorry, thank you. So you have written the paper, you have sent it for review, and now you have gotten the results back from the editor, asking you to do one of the following, right? Either it's an accept, great, right? You can go and party after that. It's accept with minor revision or accept with major revision, and then reject. So I think somebody else will talk about rejection later. So I'm going to focus on that the paper has come up with the recommendation that it's good, but we need you to do so and so and so. Okay? So major revision. And as you know, typically you will have a letter from the editor which doesn't say a whole lot, right? Which is summarizing what's being said earlier. It's the AE's letter, and there are letters from, let's assume there are two referees. So now, what do you do at this point, right? The whole thing boils down to it's a game of, as Jeet said earlier, right, that you are not present, right? You are not present. You cannot really go and talk to the referees. You cannot go and talk to the editors. Whatever you do, you have to do in terms of how and what you revise. Okay. So first of all, spend some time, right? Relax. It's not a rejection, right? It's not a rejection. So it's a good news. It may not be a very good news, but it's a good news. So read the review reports very, very carefully, right? They may be long reports, or some of them could be just a page in length. Sometimes the review reports are even 4 or 5 pages. Sometimes the review reports are even longer than the paper itself. I don't write those kind of reviews, but But you want to go and understand each and every point that the review team is telling you. Okay? One approach that I have used, and many of my co-authors have done the same thing, is that you take the review report and maybe if it is a PDF, convert it into a Word document. Okay? So you have several points that the review reports have said, like do this, point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, referee 1, referee 2, AE, right? Put that all in a Word document. And you want to, in a sense, start writing a response letter even before you start revising the paper. Okay? Because you want to come up with a strategy on what is it that you would do. Not just go and start revising the paper. You need to think about what is it that you will do. What part you will be able to address, what part of the revisions you will not be able to address, what part of the revisions maybe you don't want to address. Of course, things that you, and typically, this is what you would be thinking at this point, that some of these comments from the referees just don't make any sense, right? Maybe the referee has not even read the paper, right? I've already done what the referee is saying for me to do, right? This happens very often, or I cannot do really what they are asking me to do. It's like writing the paper again. It's writing the paper that the reviewers want, which is often the case. And then you also have this typical case where referee 1 says do this and referee 2 says do that, right? Or they might be pointing you to a different direction. Okay? In all these cases, now what do you do? Okay. So first of all, what you want to do is take some guidance from the AE's letter, okay? Because AE is your is referring those two referees in case there is a disagreement. The AE is also providing you with some guidelines on what to do. Because so many times the referee would have a whole bunch of things that they want you to do. But the AE might provide you in a very subtle way that this is what is really important. You must address this. And then the other things that the AE might not even mention in his or her letter. Sometimes you may also find that the AE would be tilting toward one referee versus other. Okay? So you have to take this clue in order to revise your paper. That is, you don't want to do everything that the referee, which is not in agreement with the AE, is asking you to do. Because then you will make the AE very unhappy. So it is a negotiation in the sense that you want to please the referees, but you don't have to do everything. At the same time, you want to do enough that the referee would be satisfied that the reviewers have done a serious attempt to revise the paper. Right? Because as a referee, when the paper is going to come back to the referee, right? When we are all human beings, we want to be happy that, hey, I made these suggestions, these comments were seriously taken. The authors have done a good job of revising. They were able to do these major things. Maybe they were not able to do some other things, but you have to then write in your response letter why you chose not to address those concerns. Okay? I want to come back to that point earlier about I've already done this in my paper. Why is that the referee is asking me to do this again or to explain this again? Well, the reason might be that in your mind you have done it, but you may not have written it well, you may not have explained it well, okay? And therefore you may want to go back and perhaps elaborate on what the referee is asking you to do. You have to be very serious about revision. Again, don't ignore any point that the referee has asked you to do. It has to be very thorough, right? And don't do a lip service to it. It has to really, really go into the depth of that revision. And then the timeliness is also important, right? You cannot just be sitting on the paper. Don't rush through the revision, but also don't take months after months to revise the paper, because then the referee would have forgotten what they asked you to do. And then they have to reread the whole thing again. Okay. I just want to give you two other tips before I pass it to Jatinder, because it just came to me. When I write a paper, we typically write introduction at the end. Okay? Because introduction, as was mentioned earlier, sort of summarizes what is your motivation, what is it that you have achieved, what are your main results. Okay? And there has to be a consistency between what you are saying in the introduction and what is the rest of the paper. And many times there's a mismatch between the two. Because people wrote the introduction, then they did the paper, and then they revised the paper, but they didn't revise the introduction. Okay? So we write introduction at the very end. Also, you want to make sure that in the paper, your main result comes quickly. Right? Don't make your main result the last theorem or the last result, because by that time, the referees might have lost interest in your paper. Okay? And therefore, then they're looking for ways to reject your paper. Okay? So with that, I'll pass it to Jeet.
Thank you very much. Now, I think it was mentioned earlier that papers do get rejected. In fact, if we take a look at the statistics, there are more papers rejected than they are asked for revision or published. I mean, if you take a statistics, that's the way it is. So let me talk a little bit about why papers get rejected and then what do we do about it. And I'm one of them who has struggled with this a lot more than my friends about the rejections. One, because I got a lot more rejections. And the second, I always got angry and upset and did the wrong things, like calling and yelling at the editor, and all of that. I've done those things. So let me first get to why papers get rejected. There are some fundamental things that we need to understand. And it doesn't have anything to do with the review process and all that kind of a thing either. The fact is, the supply of papers is a lot more than the demand. If we take a look at the top-level journals, we can count the number of papers that can be published in all these in our field in a given year. And we can take a look at how many papers are submitted. So then we'll find out the ratio of the submitted papers to the published papers. Therefore, the chances of rejection are more than the chances of acceptance. So that follows right there first. The second thing is, if we really take a look at the point of view of the reviewers or the AEs or the editors or everything, even though we try to be very good and give very good feedback to the authors in terms of helping them revise the paper and get the paper acceptable and all that, the fact is it is easier to reject than to accept. Because if we are wrong in the process, if it is rejected, nobody will come to know. If it is published and we are wrong, everybody will know, oh, this guy didn't know what he was doing, and all that kind of a thing. So that is also fundamentally is true of the process that we have. Okay? And the third thing is, most of us as authors make some silly and naive mistakes while submitting the original paper or even the revised paper. If we get upset at the reviewers or the associate editor in our response letter, we write things that instead of trying to cool down the reviewers or the AEs or everything, in fact, it excites them all the more to reject the paper rather than accept the paper. And I've done all those things. I will admit that. And I don't have time to share all the things. In fact, I could have shared the reviewers' comments and how I responded and what happened after that. I could have shared some of them. I have a log of that somewhere. Okay? So now, how do you handle the rejections? All of us have different ways. All of us get different kind of things and everything. First is we need to start thinking objectively. And I think, as Dilip said, think about the editors and think about the reviewers and pay attention to what the editor is saying, pay attention to what AE is saying. Now, the difficulty I had is when I'm angry and upset, it is extremely difficult for me to think about objectively and see what I can do and what I should be doing and all that. I think one of the things that I have found in my anger and my upset, rather than handling the paper revision or something to what to do, is to read the editorial policy of the journal again. See, have I misunderstood something? Maybe I made a mistake in the target that I chose. Maybe I didn't understand the editorial policy. Maybe I didn't understand the scope of the journal and all these kind of things. That may well be. Look for the key statements in the reviews. And let week or two pass by. Because you might start thinking about the reviews much differently after a period of 1 or 2 weeks than you think when you get the reviews back. And I found myself that I read them differently. When I get first, I say, my God, they rejected my paper. How dare they? And then I read that. But after 2 weeks or so, I say, this makes sense. I didn't pay attention to this and all that. So think about that, the letters after that. I strongly recommend don't do the last one. Don't call the editor unless it is absolutely, absolutely essential at the end. Then also politely send an email. Nowadays that thing exists. And send an email politely, very politely, saying all the good things about the editors, all the good things about the reviewers, even though you disagree with the reviews. In fact, the reviews which are most useful are the ones that you disagree with. That's what will tell you quite a bit about the things. Okay? So here are something. First thing, do not ever send the same paper again to another journal without taking a look at the reviewer's comments. I have gotten a paper for review from 7 different journals, same paper. So guess what? My review was the same. I just took it the same review and sent my review back. 7 journals. The authors got very unfortunate that 7 times the paper came to me for review. But it can happen. So do not send the paper to another journal or anywhere without handling what the reviewer said. Okay, that is first thing. So use the comments because they are useful comments. Even those that you don't agree with, even those that you think are wrong, even those that you think are absolutely showing you that the reviewer did not even understand or read your paper. Always handle those because there is something in that we didn't do in the paper in the first place, we need to take a look at. And that is not, I'm not asking you to give up your pride. You take pride in your work. You have done the work. It is good work, otherwise you wouldn't have done it. As KK said, this is your interest. You're the ones who got interested, motivated, and everything like that. That prompted the reviewers to give the comment for you to be able to use them. Okay? It is distasteful, all that kind of a thing. Learn from the rejections. I think I said earlier, every solution today is a problem tomorrow. Every success today could be a failure tomorrow. Every failure today allows you to succeed tomorrow. So learn from the mistakes, learn the review process, and then really get to the specific changes you want to make to the journal that you want to submit the paper again. Most importantly, get through your upset. I cannot say don't get upset because we will get upset at the rejections. And in fact, sometimes it stays for a long, long time. Okay? But don't take an action in your state of upset and angry or disgust. Okay? Past that stage, don't blast at people. I've done that, as I said, all through. I can give you absolute horror stories about that and all that kind of things, but please don't, because that will always lead to the undesired decisions that we don't want to have. Okay? So with that, in conclusion, I think research and publishing is an emotional and rewarding experience. I don't think we will be in it unless we want to be. This is what we chose for ourselves. That is one thing that we've got to understand that. Okay? Second, doing research and publishing requires a commitment and confidence. It is not for the half-hearted. If you are not interested in this, as KK said earlier, you need to get to your interest. This is your interest. If it is not, don't. And we've got to do the complete work. I've seen the authors, in fact, I talked to some of them, I will submit it and see what happens, then I will fix it after the reviewer's comments. Never do that. Do not ever send a paper for publication thinking that you will get the ideas to complete a paper. That is a very wrong thing to do. And I know authors, I talk to the people that do that. Even the seasoned faculty members do that. So please don't. Okay? Third, I say myself, and from my experience, doing research and publishing requires a discipline. And I don't know how busy you are. I don't know how busy anybody is when they're doing the research. I don't know whether you can spend a day of a week, whether you can spend an hour of a week or 2 hours of a week. I don't care. But whatever you chose to do, whatever level you chose to do, be disciplined. If you say you're going to spend 2 hours a week on research, do spend 2 hours a week on research. Don't use the logic, I'm too busy, I will spend 4 hours next week, I can't spend 2 hours this week. Or, I didn't get sleep, I need to get my sleep. Well, if you sleep 4 hours, sleep 3. If you sleep 3 hours, sleep 2. But be disciplined. I've seen in my career, whenever I've maintained my discipline, I have succeeded. When I have deviated from the discipline, I have failed. And that doesn't mean that I don't get undisciplined. I do several times. But you need to get through that kind of a things. Okay? And being busy is not an excuse for that. Okay? Dealing with criticism and rejection is essential for us. This is an academic profession. In academic profession, everybody has a right to say whatever they feel like. It's the free world. So therefore, people will criticize, sometimes not in the right way. They mean well, but it may not come through the right way. And we need to learn to take that. And we need to learn to take the rejection every which way, what would come to that. And they are essential for our own growth. They are essential for our own confidence and our own ability to publish in the high-quality journals. And as Prashant said, write high-quality papers. So thank you very much. Now we will open up the floor for discussion. Everything is a go. Yeah.
I think everybody has covered pretty much 99.99% of the points. So I will probably focus on point 01. It might be reinforcement. I've been editing a journal for 20 years now. It's called Journal of Information Technology, Case and Application Research. And 3 points I would like to make in the interest of time constraint that we have. The topic you choose either for your PhD dissertation or for any research, you must have passion for it. You must have real interest in finding out more on that theme. Don't choose a topic just because your PhD supervisor is asking you to do it. Or in a conference, I am asking you to do it. Or anybody else on the panel is asking you to do it. You should have real interest in that theme or that topic. For example, I chose a topic of how can e-government help in reducing corruption. And I really enjoyed that particular topic because that is relevant to the times, particularly in the context of India. Number 2, think about long-term and short-term impact on 3 constituencies. If there is no impact of your research, don't do it. Those 3 constituencies are industry, which can be not-for-profit, profit, NGOs, all kinds of industry, government, and society at large. The papers that are cited the most are the ones which had impact on one or more of these constituencies. I did research on that and made a presentation at IIM Ahmedabad last year. Third point, which I'm reinforcing Prashant's point, and I remember Gordon Everest of University of Minnesota. He said that just as a beautiful flower is a joy forever, a good writing is a joy forever. So how you write is extremely important. Short, sweet, simple sentences convey a lot more than long, complex sentences. And I'll say a few more things which I say to all the authors when I get really confused what they're writing. Every word should have a reason to be part of a sentence. And every sentence should have a reason to be a part of a paragraph. And all the contents should flow seamlessly throughout the paper, that people enjoy reading the paper and just say, wow. Okay, thank you.
Questions?
Thank you very much, panel. Professor Palsani, you mentioned about plagiarism. I totally 100% agree. I think it's fatal. But my question is about self-plagiarism. Now, self-plagiarism, I mean, nowadays, earlier at least, there was some sort of a process where a paper was presented in a conference, feedback was received from that conference, and that paper was improved and then submitted to a journal. Nowadays, some of the journals have taken a stance that that is self-plagiarism. They have their own definitions for that. What is your take, some of your editors, What is your take on self-plagiarism? Thank you.
Fortunately, most conferences would not restrict you from publishing in journals, So I suppose the same is true for this conference. The work that you have done, if you improve it, then you can publish in journals. I think ICIS used to be, I'm talking in the IS discipline, where they will have copyrights and stuff. So for the most part, you're okay. However, I would caution that if you're using something verbatim, even your own self, you provide a citation. And generally, it's not a good idea to take the same exact paper and publish it in a journal or another conference. You always want to improve it, change it, modify it, whatever. But do not take the same, because you do get some feedback anyway. But I think, now I cannot speak for all, but most journal editors are more sympathetic to self-plagiarism. Personally, I don't believe it's self-plagiarism is really plagiarism. You're using your own work, but that's my own opinion. But still, just to be sure, make sure you take those important steps. If you're using verbatim something, you can self-cite it, and always improve the paper. Those are my thoughts.
Well, one of the problems that we have nowadays is many of the journals have automatic submissions and automatic checks for the plagiarism. And it's a machine check. And in the machine check, they don't distinguish whether the conference allows for the paper to be published or not. So therefore, it doesn't even go to the editor. It gets rejected before it goes to the editor, saying there is a 37% similarity with the other paper, therefore we cannot consider for publication. So to handle that, the first thing is that be clear in the letter that you write to the editor, that yes, this paper has been presented at a conference. We have changed this paper, and this is the way we have changed this paper, so that at least there is an acknowledgement that you are making that yes, you presented the paper. The second thing is check the journal's policy. There are, even though the conference may allow you to publish the paper somewhere, but the journal may not accept papers which are published in the proceedings. And there are certain journals like that they will refuse to publish regardless of the policy of the conference that we have. So you need to check those kind of things before you get into that. It is becoming complex as we go on with the automatic check and the machine learning environment that we are in right now. But I think it's up to the authors, it's incumbent upon us as the authors to be upfront about this and communicate as much as we can so that we get that handle.
I want to add one more point. And this has happened to me as an editor of the journal. What I found out, the paper is submitted to us. We do a review. This happened more than 2 times. And one of them, paper came from an Indian author. And do not do this. They had submitted the same paper to 2 or 3 journals at the same time. Very ethically wrong. They hope that they'll not be caught. But again, something like this can be fatal to your career. If not fatal, it will soil your reputation for a very long, long time. So it's happened to me. We were ready to publish, and then one of the reviewers said, and send me the link. The same exact paper was published. So that's obviously a case of self-plagiarism. And the author came with the excuse, hey, it's my own paper, I can publish it. Not good. There's another example I'll give you where top-tier journal. The paper was published in top-tier journal, but these guys were smart. These were, actually the authors were well-known authors, like the top 10, 20 in the IS discipline. But they were so smart that they changed the language. They changed the models slightly, and then they changed the names of the constructs in the model. And they turned it upside down, but the essential ideas were the same. So in the journal had been published in actually MISQ, which is our top journal, and then they submitted to INM, which is the next level journal. And the reviewer said, "What do you think?" I read it to AE and I agreed. They were trying to pull a fast one over us. We rejected that. Sometimes you get by. Sometimes you can sneak by the reviewers, or you can use deceptive practices. But my advice is don't. You just have to be caught once. Just once, and your career is pretty much over.
Questions? Yes, sir.
I want to take your view because when we are focusing on citation is becoming a priority. So, what is your view on this? If it is good idea to cite editors or associate editors or the journal itself in which we are submitting the paper. So, does this improve any chance? So, it may be a emotional thing for the editor himself that this paper is citing me, given it's a high quality writing.
So, anything gratuitous is not very desirable. It doesn't work. It's not terribly sustainable.
Go ahead.
I think one need, in fact, just we talk about the egos of the authors, there are also egos of editors. And in fact, in a fairly top tier, it is a top tier journal. And I'm a department editor. And the editor-in-chief, writes back in his editorial letter, puts in his paper and are almost saying, look at this paper. So it cuts both ways. We get gratification with the citation. I think the more important thing is to use judgment and not to be gratuitous about it. But it is important to acknowledge work, right? And also it's important to acknowledge, this is somewhat related to the point about plagiarism, because this is the bind you get into, because most of the top tier journals follow what we call the blind review process, right? Yet, it is not uncommon for especially, and I have seen this over and over again, where you want to communicate as a quote-unquote a well-established researcher or faculty, you want to let your identity known, because sometimes you want the identity of your name have some weight into the review process. And it's not that difficult to figure out who sometimes the author is, because they have presented this work and all that. But at the same time, some of this is a very judgment call. I would say it's more important to play it straight. It may hurt, be somewhat in the short run, but in the long run, that's why I said you got to be consumer of the literature to contribute. So you give people the credit they deserve, nothing more, nothing less. And then let the chips fall where they may.
I think I do want to add that if you are submitting a paper to a journal, make sure that there are some citations from that journal.
I had one other slide which I skipped. I wasn't sure how well it will go with the audience, but given your question, I'm going to show that slide. It's going forward? Maybe I can't get there. I'm holding it upside down.
No, you got out of it.
I'm done?
No, you got out of that presentation. Now you can go forward.
The slide, can you get to that? The slide is called, I may not have chosen the right term, I called it the ugly side of publishing. We want to be upfront with you, okay? That's my point. We're going to tell you all the good things, all the right way, all the scientific way of, but there's what we have mostly described as a rational process, right? All five of us. These are the things you have to do. What I call it the political process. Personally, I'm against it. Having said that, At the end of the day, you all want to publish. There is, whether we like, that's the big elephant in the room. People don't want to talk about it. It's sitting there. But I do want to preface that in order to get published, and not many people would talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it, which is networking would help, knowing the editors would help, drawing the citations, the proper citations would help, meeting them, meeting them, talking with them. People go to these lengths. I'm personally against it, and I've avoided it as much as possible, is have one of the senior authors, one of the senior researchers become co-authors. I think, in my view, that's ethically bad. End of the day, it happens. So I'm not going to advise you to not do it, but I'm not also going to advise you to do it specifically, but at least be aware of it. I want you to be aware of it. Those things do exist. It's a sort of a sad thing to talk about in a panel like this. But since we're going to be upfront, we're going to be honest with you, I'm going to tell you where it is. Thank you.
Well, our faculty has done research on this, and there's a paper in Science published by some of my colleagues that talk about this process, and as a result of that, there is a lot more awareness in the editors, and the editors have changed the policy that they do not ask now this kind of a thing that you're talking about. The second thing I will say is this: even though the political process exists, or may exist, I don't know, I would advise against it. As Dilip said, one of the things that you do want to do is to read the journal articles and see if your paper fits the journal. And it may well be that if nothing is published in that journal related to your field or related to your paper, maybe it is possible that your paper does not fit that journal. On the other hand, it is fairly possible that your topic is such an important thing, even though nothing has been done about that in that journal, it should go into that journal. It's up to you to make a case for that.
Can I make one quick comment? Because I think everybody's answering. I think if everybody submits an article to my journal, Journal of Education and Application Research, it is not required, but it is expected that he or she should read similar articles on the same field in the journal in which he is sending the article. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. This, instead of citing all the articles from MISQ and ISR and all those, and not citing any relevant articles published in the journal in which you're submitting. So it's kind of expected. It makes sense. It makes moral sense for you to read the articles in the journal in which you want to be published. That's it.
Sir, I have a question to, whenever we check with the plagiarism, it comes like 40% or 50%. So is there any ideal percentage of plagiarism which can be accepted?
It can never be zero. That's right.
Well, I don't think there is anything percentage-wise you can give, but generally 7 to 10% automatically comes because you use your terminology, you use something else, you use the name of the journal, you do something, so it happens. Anything more than about 10%, I will get concerned. And by the way, nowadays we can check before we submit. We don't have to go through that process that the journals check. Nowadays it exists. If you go to even turn it in, you can check and see what plagiarism is or something like that, and you can change the language before you submit. So if it goes more than 10%, I won't submit a paper.
There's another side to what you're saying when we talk of plagiarism and sort of self-plagiarism. Anytime you do programmatic research, and when I mean programmatic is think of papers coming out of a dissertation, right? Or paper coming out of, say, funded research, you have NSF grant. So inevitably there will be a platform of whatever it is, it's the problem domain, it's the literature, And when you are publishing out of, say, an NSF, a major NSF grant or some of these grants, or you're covering a dissertation, it's very likely that there will be some common verbiage. That in itself should not be a cause for concern. And it does happen, and those are what I call sort of the false signals, and that does get resolved. I mean, and what happens is that, at a purely crass, percent level, somebody may say, oh, geez. Then all you have to just tell people that, should that happen, because that this is coming out of my NSF grant, this is coming out. And as long as you are very clear that this is, it has a platform, but it's a very different paper, and also the acknowledgement of what's new about this paper versus the other paper, as opposed to, there are the same paper and you're publishing it in two different places. And I think that's a judgment call one has to make. But it does happen, and probably it will happen. So I think this mindless, looking at the verbiage, I think people are also getting past that, because some of the good, solid programmatic research and solid, good dissertations do yield, at least in our school, our rule of thumb is you should be able to at least publish 3 papers from a good dissertation. And if you have a dissertation and if you have 3 papers coming out, which is nothing uncommon, by the way, then there will be some inevitable overlap in language. But that can be fixed, and people do get by with that.
Questions?
Yeah. Good morning, sir. I am PhD student. I have very question what Indian student face while writing a paper. So suppose we are conceptually writing a paper based on our triple L model. Triple L model, suppose we are saying that learning, linkage and leverage model for writing a paper. So whatever we are learning, we are linking, and after linking, we are leveraging all these learnings. So in this model, the problem is that what we faced by Indian student about English is our third language. Not first, not second, is third language. Because we have one regional language, second is our national language like Hindi, and third is English language for academic purpose. So the problem with a lot of literature-based problem what we face regarding antonyms, synonyms, what words should be appropriate for expression, and how to come over this expression, means clarity of our expression, how we overcome this problem. Because what we want to express from learning to linking to leverage is not coming in proper flow or proper way. And that is the major problem faced by Indian authors and beginners like us. So how to overcome this barrier? That is I want to learn from your side to get published in very high impactful journals.
I think we all struggle with making things clear. We assume so many things that are obvious. Sometimes we skip things. You have to develop a network of friends, which basically will serve you, basically give you feedback, and you give feedback to them. So it's not only a question of what kind of phrases you use, but basically the topic has to be understandable to somebody who has never read. I have a few people, 3-4 people in my department that whenever I write a paper, I just simply tell them, could you please read that? Does that make sense? Do I miss something? Do I miss something so obvious that basically I will confuse the audience? I don't think there is any way around other than just getting this feedback. And you have to give feedback to others.
I get, since my journal is international, I get submissions from different countries. By the way, the Indians write fairly good, But when I get papers from countries where English is not the first language, so my advice has been this. Well, I end up editing a lot of them myself. But my advice is this, and don't let your ego come in the way, have a professional editor. And you can find them, professional editors, look at the paper and just completely rework it.
Good morning, sir. Dear esteemed panel, thank you for your insightful suggestion, and it was really helpful for especially me in getting the research process. My question is to Prashant, sir. Sir, you said that rule of 3-3-3 and the paradox of quantity, quality, and continuity. So as of now, I am facing a challenge of quality versus quantity. So I am a faculty at TFI Management Institute, Manipal. So can you address this 3 plus 3 plus 3 and quality quantity paradox? Thank you.
So when I said 333, I meant for a research intensive school. So it does not apply for necessarily everyone. Depending on your focus, where it may be 222 or 111, and that's fine. Now, in terms of the second part of your question, when I say portfolio, it's important. Not everyone, well, given that top tier journals have high the chances of rejection are high. The odds are already stacked against you. So try to write, if possible, try to write for the best journal, the best article you can write. And consult with people where to submit. Okay. Now the thing, so you may want the same research project, you may get one very high quality, one may be not as, maybe a practitioner oriented. So you can target your articles to different journals. My point is, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and that basket being top tier, because the chances are for most people, you'll end up with frustration. So, and the other point is, if your article does get rejected, like Jeet mentioned, then target it to a slightly lower, and that's where you maintain that portfolio.
Hi, sir.
Couple more questions, then we got to end. Couple more questions.
Yeah, so I have two questions. The first one is something that I've asked my own faculty, my own professors, some of whom are actually sitting in this room, but still, with all due respect, once again, I have a wonderful idea, hypothetically, and I want to publish it, but I don't have a PhD, nor am I a full-time worker, full-time employee of an academic institution. Then do I wait to get a PhD so that I can publish that idea, because by that time that will lose relevance? Or what other avenues will I have? That is the first question. Second question is, supposing I resort to publish it in an open source or an open platform like ResearchGate, then can I publish it later on? Would that be considered as publication? Or will I not be allowed to write on it once again or publish it elsewhere? Thank you.
You know, what you raise, I mean, it's very inspiring to hear what you just said. And believe me, there is a resurgence of a phenomenon called citizen science, where, I mean, and even crowdsourcing, where exactly what you're seeing, I mean, I'm seeing this happen, and this is happening in some of the work we did in medicine and elsewhere. And this is, so hats off to you and all power to you. You know, if there is one way to summarize all we are talking about, it's a process that, you know, the process is agnostic of whether doing a PhD or whoever you are, you know. Yet there is a process. So if you want to go through the process, one approach could be to, you know, perhaps see if you can partner with somebody like a faculty. And believe me, you may have to knock a couple of doors, because it's a non-traditional approach, but yet the one I would very much applaud, because you will find somebody who would be willing to work with you. And you want that, and may not even want, you know, a co-authorship, but even if they, you know, if they want a co-authorship, they probably do contribute something that's what, but it will get you to what you want to happen, which is, you know, some of the best ideas come from people, not from academic. Creativity is not in the bastion of academic institutions. We know that. And we are becoming, and we better be humble about it. So the best ideas come from who knows where, and you don't have to have a PhD or have a PhD or doing a PhD to come up with these ideas. So, but I think if there is a process and there is a system in place, so at least, you know, in the initial phases, it might be helpful to partner. And you will find, I mean, I guarantee you that you will find somebody who will work with you. And that's what I would do as a starting point, right? Because nobody can prevent good work coming out. It just has to be communicated, just like a product. You can have a great product.
somewhere, somehow, whether it's a venture capitalist, somebody helps you, and that is equally true in academia. I personally do this all the time because creativity is not institutionalized. It's way beyond institutions. So hats off to you, and you should pursue that.
So let me answer the second question. If you publish in any journal, whether it is open access or anything, you cannot publish in another journal. So I think we are running out of time, so I want to thank the panelists for their contributions. Thank you very much. I want to thank the audience for being here. Otherwise, the panel won't make any sense on you. So thank you very much for being here. I appreciate that.
Thank you, panel, for the insightful session. Now I request Dr. Sriram Narayan to give vote of thanks to the panel.
Well, I certainly don't want to stand between you and lunch. So thank you to the panel here. I think we are very grateful that you took the time to educate us on all the insights that you have gained from your publications and your research careers. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
Now I request Dr. Chhajed sir to facilitate the panel.